I know that half of you right now are like, I don't know what's going on here. Why is he so fascinated with this one extra mineral? You don't understand. This recipe is technically lost to time. You can't make it anymore unless you have minerals that you literally have been hoarding for years. This is not on the market anymore. Gertstley borate is essentially dead. Kona F4 Feldspar is dead. You can't make the original recipe anymore. And this has both of those things in it. Both of them! That's right, nerds. I wear overalls now. Deal with it. Hello, you dirty potters. How are you today? This is a very exciting video for me. And actually an extremely exciting video. That's too small. I can't sit here. That is way too small. That's a little better, but now I feel like I'm looking at you like I need like mommy milkers or something, because you know what? Never mind. Today is a very exciting video for me and probably a smaller demographic of people who follow me in the glaze chemistry community, but I do need to do some exposition before we start the actual video. So if you want to skip to the video itself without this exposition, I promise I'll make it short. You can go to this timestamp right here. But for those of you who are into glaze chemistry, or at least a little bit of glaze history, you should probably stick around, because this is it's a white elephant exciting. Like, it's only exciting for me in a small subdivision of the pottery community, but everyone else who usually buys bottled glazes, you're probably like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But don't worry, baby birds, I'll feed you. I'll let you know where the worm comes from. That sounded wrong. All right, for those of you who are not indoctrinated into the glaze chemistry community at all, I will let you know what's going on in this small section. But right now is your last chance, because I know some of you do be impatient. Looking at you, last chance. Good, I'm glad you learned patience in 3rd grade. So I, like many other potters out there, make their own glazes. But those glazes are very dependent on the minerals that are available to us, usually that we buy in stores. There's not a lot of us who go out to the mountains and like go get our own minerals. The high majority of us generally go to a store and buy these white powders that have been refined by the minerals that are dug up by companies and sold with a specific package and label on them, and that have a very specific chemistry to them. Throughout history, some of these minerals die off because of either policy or availability of minerals, or the fact that like the pit runs dry and we just can't have it anymore, or sometimes like legal issues come up. There's a bunch of reasons that come up. The main one that we're dealing with right now is lithium carbonate, because lithium is in like all of our batteries right now because we use lithium ion batteries. This means the price of lithium goes up a lot because of supply and demand issues. This also means that whenever I buy a pound of lithium, it goes for crazy amounts of money in comparison to what it went through like 10 years ago. Because we as potters share these minerals with the rest of the world who need them for other things, such as batteries. This results in a bunch of minerals dying over time. For example, we have different forms of feldspars, things that usually we use in our glaze recipes and or clays. For example, we had Kona F4 feldspar a very long time ago, but it's discontinued. You can't buy it anymore. You can barely get it anymore unless you get it from an old potterhead who no longer needs it, or someone's relative who's like, hey, my grandpa was a potter, I have all these chemicals, I don't know what to do with them, please look through it, see what you like, and pay me a little bit of scratch to get it off my hands. And generally that's where people find the old minerals that are usually higher value and far more rare than what we have today. A good example of this is Kona F4 feldspar that cannot be gotten anymore. After this was discontinued, companies had to figure out a way to keep selling feldspar in a chemically similar way. So we came up with like Minspar 200, and that was pretty close. And that kind of got scratchy, you know? So then we had G200 feldspar. And then like sooner or later, we had different brands of G200 feldspar. So we had G200 HP feldspar, and then we had G200 EU feldspar. And then over time, you know, we start kind of losing those, and then other people come up with Custer feldspar. And these are all feldspars in the realm of feldspar, but they have different elements attached to them minerally, and they have different power when you put them inside of a glaze or a clay. That being said, a lot of the older minerals, such as Kona feldspar, are very, very difficult to get, and old head potters, like myself, swear that they were cleaner, better, and more powerful than the stuff we have today. Just as a slight example for anyone who is into the chemistry at all, Kona feldspar chemically is this. This is what you get on an elemental table when you put it inside of a glaze, right? And this is essentially what you're getting chemically, which is what we really care about when we're making glazes. This over here is Custer feldspar. And if you put the two next to each other, you can see that one might come with some things that you don't really need for the power of your glazes. One is technically what I like to call cleaner. The goal when I make a glaze is for it to be clean and powerful. That's essentially what I do. In fact, many times when I look at a glaze recipe, I look at it and go, you don't need as much as this, you can put more flux in here, you can take out silica here, because silica's damn near everything, so you don't need that much of it realistically. By the time I'm done, I usually have an entirely new glaze that I give back to the glaze maker and I go, here, this might work a little bit better for you. And in fact, because of people like me hoarding minerals, I have the visual example of all of these feldspars. This canister here is Minspar 200, which was supposed to be the replacement for Kona F4 Feldspar. Kona Feldspar being very difficult and rare to get. So this is essentially the replacement. This is even difficult for me to find, and lots of people have it at their stores, but when I go to the store and I ask for it, they're like, we don't have much of it. This here is G200 Feldspar, something that we kind of have today in different forms, being EU and HP and the original, but this is my least favorite feldspar right here, to be honest with you. This just isn't as tasty, and I generally have to put a little more feldspar inside my recipes to get the same effect that I would get out of Minspar. This here is Custer Feldspar. Custer Feldspar is a tiny bit dirtier, if that makes sense. If you compare the two, realistically speaking, you can see that one is a tinge darker than the other one, and my goal as a glaze maker is to get it as clean and efficient as possible. Suffice to say that the feldspar that you use inside of your glazes and your clay do affect its functionality and color to a very great extent, as a matter of fact. But the other day I went to a friend's house who was cleaning out their garage because they had lots of minerals left over, and guess what your boy found? That's right, I found me some Kona feldspar, something that you can't even get anymore. In fact, I've been hoarding a very large amount of this for quite some time, and I forgot about it until I found this one right here. This isn't my only Kona feldspar. And all of this is just exposition to tell you that there are some recipes in the glaze world that are lost to time because we can no longer get the minerals that are supplied to us from mineral companies, like Kona feldspar. For example, the original Randy's Red recipe calls for Kona feldspar. It's like almost all of us have some form of this recipe, but almost all of us have had to replace the Kona feldspar with either Minspar or G200 feldspar or Custer feldspar, because we don't have F4 Kona feldspar anymore unless you find it in the same way I did, in some super old dusty garage that somebody was trying to get rid of their minerals in. But today, we're gonna make the real Randy's Red, the original way that it was meant to be made, with actual Kona feldspar. Also, a quick side point for anyone who cares, I will be using yellow iron oxide in this experiment instead of red iron oxide because I have a giant conspiracy theory that the majority of red iron oxide in the world being sold to us potters is like contaminated somehow. Every time I use yellow iron oxide instead of red, my glazes just turn out better. I don't know why. I've been testing it over the course of a year and everything's just turning out better. So we're going to use yellow iron oxide. So we're going to use yellow iron oxide today, but the original recipe of Randy's Red is what we're going to be using.
But Donte, you're going to mess it up. It's not the real recipe if you change it from red iron oxide to yellow iron oxide. No.
Look here, all I want to know is that if this glaze comes out amazing and way better than a red iron oxide version, will you still be here to lick my taint when I'm right? Or like, will you be gone by then? Oh, yeah. Now while I'm starting to make this glaze, there's probably two things I ought to let you know. Number one, there is a couple different recipes for Randy's Red, but I'm using the one that I originally wrote down maybe 10 years ago, and I'm also using the one that mimics Tony Hansen's on Digital Fire. This is the one that I know as the original Randy's Red recipe. This is the one that calls for Kona feldspar that we can no longer get in today's mines or pits. I will say, while I'm getting this recipe together, the high majority of people have two different recipes of Randy's Red in their possession. There's the really old one that we're using today that calls for Kona F4 feldspar that I found on Digital Fire from Tony Hansen probably like 10 years ago. This one was passed down to me from another old potter, and this is the one that I'm using for today's recipe, just with yellow iron oxide instead, because I personally think it's better, and I'm a conspiracy theorist about red iron oxide. Although the majority of you who are just getting into the glaze maker space probably use this recipe right here that's from Glazy. This one has been modified because we don't have Kona feldspar anymore. The recipe doesn't even have Kona feldspar anywhere in it, technically speaking. But we're not using the new one, we're using the old head one, because this is the original recipe, technically. A little glaze maker's tip here. What I generally do is I measure out the amount of water I'm gonna use. I put the scale away, and then I add the water to the recipe itself, but I don't add all of the water. I usually save a little bit. Usually I'm going to sieve this or blend it, and sometimes I need to add a little bit more water, but I don't want to take 160 grams because I'm using double the amount of 80 milliliters to add more water, because that would mess it up. I would use like 190 milliliters of water instead. So I just don't add all the water, counting this in as the 160 grams. Whenever I pour the glaze into my blender, I'm also technically leaving a little bit of mineral behind, and because I'm making such a small batch, I really don't want that. So that little bit of water that I saved from earlier, I'll often take this, dump a little bit of it in there, clean out the rest of the sneeze amount, I call it, and I pour that into the sieve or the blender that I'm using to mix up the glaze. And that generally takes care of a lot of the leftover mineral that wouldn't go into the batch otherwise. Now it's relatively clean. I know that half of you right now are like, I don't know what's going on here. Why is he so fascinated with this one extra mineral? You don't understand. This recipe is technically lost to time. You can't make it anymore unless you have minerals that you literally have been hoarding for years. This is not on the market anymore. Gertstley borate is essentially dead. Kona F4 Feldspar is dead. You can't make the original recipe anymore. And this has both of those things in it. Both of them! So we're gonna test this out today on the channel. We're gonna glaze a couple things with it. But we also need kind of a control. So here I have Randy's Red, made with red iron oxide and G200 Feldspar. This is kind of the newest variation of Randy's Red, made with the minerals that you can probably easily get from any mineral store. But this should do as a constant to make sure that we have a good barometer for how good this is in comparison to this. Okay, we've essentially glazed everything. This here is Randy's Red original recipe, what I am calling real Randy's Red, with Kona F4 Feldspar and Gertstley borate, along with yellow iron oxide. This follows the exact recipe that I got a very long time ago handed down to me that most people cannot make nowadays. The only difference is that we're using yellow iron oxide instead of red iron oxide. This one here, being its brother cup, the exact same clay body, is with red iron oxide and G200, I think EU Feldspar, because the shop down the street from me sells G200 in EU form. I can't find HP, I can't find Minspar 200. On top of that, I glazed this big boy off screen, just because I kind of figured to honor this special occasion of having such a realistically rare glaze, that I would glaze one of my larger pieces and make a glaze proof out of it and put it on YouTube and Instagram and the like. So these three are essentially going to be my proofs, but we're going to see how these two fare against each other as soon as we get them out of the kiln. With that being said, let's put them all in the kiln. Now that everything's out of the kiln, let's take a look. This is Randy's Red on a B mix test tile. So because the lighting is being super weird today in the studio, I took an actual picture of the test tile as well, and I put it along with the recipe on Glazy, because I do think that this glaze recipe needs to be preserved for everyone, especially the original recipe. It's very disheartening to me as a glaze maker to go on Glazy and not see the original Randy's Red recipe. I have very fond memories of trying to get this exact red out of the kiln in my youth when I found this recipe from an old potter who gave it to me. I don't even remember his name, realistically speaking. But this glaze is a fantastic teaching glaze. And just as a small example, I did another test of this glaze on a B-mix test style in my tester kiln, and I had it at 1.1 specific gravity instead of 1.25 or to 1.3, which is where the glaze usually likes to sit. And for anyone who doesn't know about specific gravity, it just means this glaze has more water than this glaze in it. And usually the closer to the number 1 it is, the more water the recipe has in it. Without getting too complicated, that's where that is. This is the glaze at 1.1 specific gravity, and it's gross, it's awful, it didn't even turn red. This glaze is so finicky that even if you add a tad bit more water, it ends up turning a little bit gray and navy blue instead of the natural red where you put it. This glaze needs to be, number one, thick, number two, have the right amount of gravity. You also have to mix it up exceedingly well, and any texture that it runs over, it often has some types of grays or blues. Here, I'll show you on this porcelain cup that we did for the test. Even on this porcelain test tile here, you can really see the difference in between where it was thick and where it was thin. And keep in mind, this is on the same dip. I pretty much got a jug and just dipped this right in there, so it's all the same thing. But even that little bit of variation from here to here came out this navy blue color I was talking about, instead of this real Randy's red, which is what most people want when they make this recipe, is this all over. Fortunately for us, we got some really good results with our consistency test. If you get really lucky, sometimes it makes these yellow spots instead of the gray spots. And you can see that here. These kind of turn navy blue right here, while these little edges here ended up turning this kind of yellowish gold. And I like this a little bit better. For the last test tile, we have a dragon fruit clay body with Randy's red only on the outside. I very often use dragon fruit just kind of as a liner glaze type of pot, and I leave the outside raw because a lot of people like this texture. And we got pretty lucky with this one. Randy's red happens to turn out fantastic on the inside of a lot of pots. This is where I kind of figured out that if you put it on a bit thicker, it usually ends up better, because almost none of us are brushing the inside of our pots. Most of us pour the inside, roll out, or we're dipping, right? But it stays in there for a tiny bit longer, probably about a second longer before we pour it out. And it almost always looks way better on the inside. Look, I know this might not be exciting to a lot of you, but it's very exciting to me. Okay, when you start making your own glazes, there's like 4 or 5 glazes that are very difficult to make your own brand of. And getting an oxidation red is one of them. Getting a good clear that works with almost every clay body, except for the really far out rangy ones, is another one of them. Getting a really good black that doesn't turn like brown or sort of blue when you mix it with something. And then getting a really good crystal glaze is another one. This is probably one of the harder in that group, is to get a very, very good standard Cone 6 oxidation red without any special attunement to your kiln. I didn't do any holds. I didn't take it up to like Cone 7 and let it drop off and called it Cone 6. Like, I didn't do any of that. This is just a straight up and down Cone 6 for Randy's red. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. This was kind of just for me, to be honest with you. To be fair, I did make a blog about this on my website, earthnationceramics.com, with notes and a stole chart and a recipe and the UMF formula, the chemistry down below. I put all that on there, so if you want to see extensive notes on how I got to this point, or how you can maybe get your hands on some of these minerals and work the chemistry around, go ahead and check out that blog. And I also put it on Glazy for free. I'm not charging anybody, it's just there, it's just for the community. But again, thank you for joining me today. Good luck with your next kiln load, and I will see you, Dirty Potters, next week.
Thank you for your patronage.